What's up, you guys? Josh here. Welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I'll be replacing this old headboard with a brand new one that I'm calling the Headboard of Shadows. And I'll also be giving away a brand new cutting board, so keep watching for details. At some point, I'll probably learn 3D modeling, but until then, I will be drawing my designs out on a piece of paper with a pencil. Okay, here's a rough sketch of my new design. It's going to have a big chunky frame going all the way around. And then on the inside, it's going to have quarter-sawn Sapele and a diamond Chevron shiplap pattern. And a big challenge for this build is going to be my budget, which is $500. So I looked up beams. They were $230 a piece. That goes way over my budget. Then I looked up 4/4 lumber. It's $12 a board foot. I would need 44 board feet. Each piece needs to be at least 48 inches long. And my total comes out to $582.56. So that alone also goes over my budget. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to keep everything under $500. And my first expense is this sheet of plywood, which was $44. And my second expense is this tongue and groove MDF. It has the groove side that I just showed, and this is the tongue side. These pieces interlock together, creating a gap in between each piece. All of these tongue and groove slats for this build cost $108, bringing my total cost up to $152. And all of these pieces have primer on both sides, so the first thing I need to do is drum sand the primer off of one side of all the pieces. Then I removed the machine marks from the drum sander with the orbital sander. And this is a sheet of quarter-sawn Sapele veneer. I'm going to use it to cover up the MDF slats and make them look like solid wood. This sheet costs about $100, and it brings my total cost up to $253. A couple advantages of using veneer with an MDF core are there's less wood movement, and it's also cheaper than using solid wood. So I just used 14 clamps on that glue up, and I want to be able to do 2 glue ups at once, but I don't want to have to buy 14 clamps, so I bought this vacuum bag instead, which will allow me to do a glue up without 14 clamps. When I cut the veneers, I cut them slightly oversized, so now I just need to do a little cleanup on the edges. For the groove side, I'm going to be using a block plane and a sanding block. Okay, so I just cleaned up this edge right here. Now I'm going to take it to the table saw, clean up this other edge right here. In between each slat, there's going to be a shadow gap, and I want that shadow gap to be gray, so I'm going to paint each side of these pieces gray. And I don't want to get paint on my veneer, so I'm putting some blue tape down. A pro tip for using blue tape is to pull the tape while the paint is still wet, and you get a crisper line that way. Okay, I'm not going to show it, but I also painted the other side of these slats, plus I had 2 more stacks the same size. Okay, this is the same sheet that I was breaking down earlier that's gonna act as my substrate. Right now I'm just gonna lay out some lines that I can use while I'm laying out my chevron diamond pattern. These lines that I'm laying out right here are for a hand-carved piece that I'm going to be making later on in the video. Even though I carefully calibrated my miter saw before I made these cuts, even a small error gets compounded, so I still wound up with a small gap at the end. I anticipated this happening, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a jig called a shooting board. The first thing I had to do was joint one edge of this MDF, so I used this aluminum extrusion, and then I cut the other side so it was parallel. And now I'm cutting a small rabbet on the edge so my planer blade doesn't cut into my jig. This first piece that I'm clamping on right here is to reference my square off of, and this second piece that I'm installing is to reference the work piece off of, and it's going to act as my fence. So here's how I'm going to use a shooting board to sneak up on the perfect angle for these cuts. So if I end up with a gap on this side after I put the pieces together, then I need to remove material from this side to let the pieces come together. So in that case, if I need to remove material here, I'm going to use these plane cards to make micro adjustments on this fence. So if I need to remove material here, I'll put the cards on this side. And then if the gap ends up being here, then I need to remove material there, and then I can move the cards over to this side. And here's what the joints look like after using the shooting board. One of the cool things about these slats is you don't have to face nail them. You can just nail into the groove and the nails are hidden once you interlock the pieces together. So to lock these down, I'm just using the 18 gauge brad nails and a little bit of glue on the miter joint. So this whole process, there's a lot of back and forth. I do a dry fit, and then I take the pieces to the shooting board, make an adjustment, do another dry fit, and repeat the process until I get the perfect length and the perfect angle. And the hand plane that I'm using for the shooting board is a number 5 jack plane from Wood River. I've had this hand plane for about 7 years, and I always get good results with it. I'll put a link in the description if anybody wants to pick one up. Everything's starting to get really heavy, so now I'm going to add this PL Premium to lock everything down and hold everything together. This brings my total up to $260.28, so that leaves me less than $240 to complete the rest of the project and build the entire frame. As you can see, I left some of these pieces long, and that's because I thought it would look cooler when I cut them off with my track saw right now. Not gonna lie, the first time I picked this up by myself, I almost dropped it, so I called in my buddy Stevie to help me carry this back inside. Stevie, thank you for helping me out. Okay, now it's time to build the frame. For that, I'm going to be using this sheet of Baltic birch plywood. It costs $44.12. That brings my total cost up to $304.40. Here's all my parts for the frame. Now each piece of the frame is going to have one miter folded corner, so that's what I'm going to cut right now. A feature that I forgot to mention about the frame also is that it's going to be a floating frame, so it's going to appear to be floating over the main piece of the headboard. Now I'm going to glue up these miter folds. If you guys want to see a good video on this, look up Insider Carpentry. He's got some really good tutorials on this. Now I'm adding some blocking for support, and I'm keeping them far from the edges because I'm going to be cutting some miters on the ends, and I don't want to hit a screw with my miter saw. I'm tying everything together with Titebond 2 glue, 18 gauge brad nails, and pocket hole screws. Alright, now that I'm done building the frame, it's time to give this old, failed river table project new life, but first I have to cut away this epoxy. I had to make sure these pieces are square because I'm about to glue them into panels. Okay, off camera, I glued these pieces of cedar into 2 panels and then I ran them through my planer. Alright, so the other day I decided to see if my miter saw was big enough to cut these beam pieces. And as you can see, the miter saw did not cut all the way through, so I have a problem there. And I ruined this beam piece because I cut the miter the wrong way. It's supposed to go like that. The miter's supposed to go this way. So now I completely ruined this whole piece. So I have to completely cut all these parts all over again. And I have to drill all these pocket holes again. And I have to completely rebuild this piece. And it sucks. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do now. Okay, back to the cedar panels. The reason why I'm not using Sapele for this is because Sapele has a Jenka scale rating of 1,510 pounds per square inch, and cedar comes in at about 900 per square inch. So cedar's a lot softer of a wood and it's going to carve a lot easier. Now I'm laying out lines to create a grid of 1/2 inch squares. Once I have my squares, I bisect the squares from corner to corner 3 times. And now I'm bisecting the squares again from the opposite corner. And now I'm bisecting these squares one more time from the opposite corner that I did last. And I'm done laying out my grid. Now I'm marking my waist so I don't remove material from the wrong spot. Picked up this chip carving knife on Amazon. It cost $13. I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to get one. And that brings my total cost up to $317.40. Since I have to cut so many of these triangles, I'm cutting them in batches, 1 row at a time. So I make 1 cut all the way down the row, turn the workpiece, make the next cut, and then turn the workpiece 1 more time and make the final cut. After every couple rows, I would hit my chip carving knife with a leather strop to keep it sharp, and I would also periodically sharpen it on a whetstone. Keeping the knife sharp made a huge difference in the quality of my cuts, and it also prevented me from tearing out the pieces like this right here, but this is easy enough to fix with just a little glue and blue tape. Altogether, this carving took me about 5 hours to complete, and after I was done, I had a big callus on my finger, but I had a lot of fun learning something new, and I really am happy with the results. Before I go full send and cut into the piece that I just spent 5 hours carving, I'm going to make a template out of this 1/4 inch MDF, and I'm going to get that to the perfect size, and then once that fits perfectly, then I'm going to cut into my piece that I carved. I don't want to stick it all the way in there because I don't know if I'll be able to get it out, but that fits pretty nice. So now I'm going to cut into my carved piece. The next detail I'm going to add to this piece is this 1/4 inch roundover. Now when I route this end grain portion of the board, I'm really careful right at the very end, and I do a little tiny climb cut just to prevent tear out, because that part of the board is really prone to tearing out. Here's a close-up of what I'm talking about. See right here, when I get to the end, I stop, and then I do a little climb cut, and then I finish the cut. Now I want this piece to be protruding about 1/4 of an inch over the surface, so I'm just going to take it to the drum sander and run it through for a few passes. This is the perfect application for a drum sander because this piece would be too short to run through a planer. Okay guys, here's the board I'll be giving away. It's got an Art Deco chaos pattern strip in it. If you want to make your own pattern, I have a tutorial on my page, so go check that out. Otherwise, to win this one, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment down below, I want that board, and this board could be yours. I have a small amount of subscribers at this point, so your odds of winning are pretty good. So yeah, just do those 3 things, and that puts you automatically into the raffle to win the board. So I'm a little traumatized from cutting that miter the wrong way before, so now I'm marking all my miters out before I cut them, and I will probably be doing this for the rest of my life. I also have to figure out a way to finish the cut on these miters because my miter saw isn't big enough. So I started the cut on the miter saw, and now I'm going to finish it off with the track saw. This is an adjustable rabbiting bit. I'm using it to cut a rabbet on the edge of my beams to create a shadow line. I should have cut the rabbet before I cut the miters, but I forgot, so now I'm doing it out of order. I just have to be really careful when I get to the end that I don't let the bearing go around the miter. Now I'm hitting the main panel with 5 coats of water-based poly. Here's a reenactment of me drilling these holes because I forgot to film it. So I'm going to attach this with 2 screws from the back. I'm going to have my nephew hold it on the top while I crawl underneath and zap in 2 screws. The only thing holding these miters together is going to be some Titebond 3 glue, and then I'm putting in a screw from the bottom, and that's it. There's a lot of different ways that I could have clamped up this miter, but I just clamped on 2 blocks, and then I put a clamp across the 2 blocks. This right here is the aforementioned mitered return at the bottom that I was talking about earlier. As you can see, I decided to roll the first coat of primer on, and I was not happy with the texture once I was done. So I sprayed the second coat, and the second coat turned out way better. So at that point, I decided that I was going to spray the entire project. So I picked up a sample of Gallery Series paint from Sherwin-Williams. The Gallery Series paint was only $8 because I just picked up a sample, and the sample was enough to coat the entire project twice. And that brings my total cost up to $325. And shout out to my nephew Jacob for helping me out on this project and for helping me out on many projects over the years. Thank you, Jacob. got this installed, but I just realized inside of my shadow gap, bare plywood. So that would be hidden, but it would drive me crazy, so we had to take it apart and I had to paint that. So I picked up that big piece of quarter-sawn Sapele that I just cut. It was $82.71, and I'm gonna use that to build a frame that's gonna go inside of the frame for my headboard. I cut my board down to 2.5-inch strips, and then I planed it down to 3/4 of an inch. And now I'm going to put a 1/4-inch round over on 2 of the corners. These miters are going on an inside corner, so I'm stopping just before I get to 45 at about 45.5, and then I'm going to cut some test pieces on my crosscut miter jig, and then I'm going to go full send and cut my work pieces. Now I cut one miter, take it to my frame, mark where my next cut's going to go, and then I cut my next miters. And once I get a nice fit, I repeated the process with the rest of the inside of the frame. Now that I've cut all my miter pieces, I'm spraying each piece with 5 coats of water-based poly. That brings my total cost up to $432.59. Here's all my beautiful finished pieces. I put blue tape on all the miters because that's where glue's gonna go. I'm using this blue level to keep the pieces aligned, and then I'm using this clear tape again to hold the miter together and act as a clamp. And I got my nephew here helping me to move these parts around because they're pretty big. And the glue I'm using for this is Type Bond 3. And these little pieces are the second part of the assembly. They're going to be covering the mitered return at the bottom of the frame. Just did a quick dry fit. Now I'm laying down some glue, and then we're going to attach everything with some clamps. And then after that, I'm going to attach the frame to the main body of the headboard with some pocket hole screws. Here's a nice view of that shadow gap that this dado creates. And here's the installation of the second part of the sub-assembly. This part right here, my mattress is going to be against it once we install it. Working with pre-finished parts was really nice because the glue squeeze out just wipes right off. This is the last expense of the project. It's an LED rope light, and it cost $26.99. I got it on Amazon. And that brings my grand total up to $459.58. So I'm well within my budget. I have $40 extra to spend on tools or materials or whatever I want. So I'm going to be installing this with a couple screws into that board that's mounted on the wall, and that's going to be covered up by the mattress, and on the top it's going to have French cleats holding it against the wall. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to my subscribers. If you guys want a chance to win that cutting board, then like, subscribe, and comment down below.